later.
אז עד כאן
This was the presentation. We'll be happy to. We have something like 10 minutes for questions. We'll be very happy if you have comments, questions, anything that you would like to tell us.
קודם כל, תודה רבה מישל, יופי של
That was a
הרצאה.
good presentation.
אבל את העניין הזה של...
But the cultural thing I didn't understand. You're saying that the problem is not laziness but culture. So my first question is, there is no tool to change the culture. The ITEC will not help. Nothing will help to take them out to work. And the other question is political. Why is it my problem that they have a cultural problem? Is it my problem? If my culture says that I have to sail in a yacht around the world, does that make it necessary for you to give me money for that? I would like to ask about people with disabilities. As you know, the Laron law or bill, until January 1st at least, did not manage to get people with disabilities to the labor market. We'll see what happened after the amendments of January. But the fact that such a person has a disability, is it realistic to think that a significant number of these people would be able to be part of the long market for the long run? The mere disability also makes them, let's be not politically correct, they are second-rate workers. According to
לפי ההיגיון של
your
מה
logic,
שאני מבין,
if I understood it correctly,
אז
if
אם
we
לא
don't,
מוסיפים...
if we add another billion or 2 billion, we will not get a dramatic change of the situation. And looking at probabilities, all the secular people are somewhere in zero. So let's cancel ITAC for secular people, take the billion we have today, divide it between all the ultra-Orthodox men and the Arab women and the disabled people, and then the achievements will be much more dramatic. The interesting thing is that ITAC is not really relevant for most of the population, which works anyway because they have this lambda, they like to go to work. It's a bit weird. And the second point is that in the comparison between 2004 and 2014, when we looked at the demographic data, can you say something about the people individually? Did poor people in 2004 remain in poverty in 2014? Or is there a change? Did the rate of personal people who manage to extricate themselves to poverty is very high? Perhaps that is what we should pay attention to.
Yeah. I'd just like to make one small remark, that in this survey, like many others, the Arab population is taken as a whole, whereas there are immense cultural differences between the Christian Arab population and the Muslim Arab population. The Christian Arab population is in many ways similar to the Chiloni Jewish population. And so, first of all, it's a misleading picture, but secondly, at least for people outside the country, it's an excuse for claiming that the Arabs suffer from discrimination, and this is what explains Arab poverty. Discrimination may be a factor, but once you distinguish between the Christian and Muslim Arab populations, you can see that the cultural factor is much more important.
Between 2002 and 2004, I'd like to tie this to the child allowances. Between 2002 and 2004, the child allowances were drastically cut. And we know there was about 21 or 22% increase in entry into the labor market among the Bedouin population. So the cut in the allowances has an impact among Arabs, but among the ultra-Orthodox, it did not so much. So if we forget ITAC, for example, for a moment, perhaps there is a more effective way of pushing people to work. You mentioned the OECD. When we get the OECD data, we give the OECD data without the ultra-Orthodox population. It is not included. I'd like to ask you, your name is Miri? 13% of working family with two wage earners are poor. Is this correct? 13% of families with two earners, yes, are poor. There is a tendency to confuse. About 80% of poor families work, but among the working families, 13% of them are poor. Okay, there's some confusion between these two elements sometimes.
I'm not going to answer according to the order, just what I remember or I wrote myself down, but as for the population of handicapped people, when we planned the ATAC, and we contemplated various systems and methods prevailing in the world, the proposals were those that were preferred by the National Security Institute, which is the one that proposed them. So it was like we proposed now to start from the first shekel, from the initial shekel. But in parallel at that time that we were discussing this, the ATAC, or what, as we used to call it then, negative income tax, there were also debates, and we said, in fact, that for the handicapped people, we can work on two levels which will complement each other. One being modifying the rules according to which how much handicapped people can work without losing their allowance altogether. And second, given that they are going to work, what subsidy can we give them beyond that? And this was our expectation. So that's where our proposal, from where the allowance will start, was not accepted. And so we had something which is closer to the French system as opposed to the American one. And that is why we came with that proposal. There are not only handicapped people, you know, there are many people with low wages, some of which are not in such state willingly, and sometimes people are not included in our system of documentation, but rather in other ones. So as for the question, Gideon's questions, one question is whether we have contemplated, we have researched permanent poverty. That is, if the person who was defined as poor in 2004 has remained poor in 2014, or has he or she succeeded in getting off poverty. So we do not have conclusive information yet about this, but as Miri put it, the data which enable us to follow the population are not those that are immediate to us. We also have their characteristics, other sources of income, etc. So we can determine who is poor and who is not. But we can do some work of merging data from other sources and to reach some replies, some answers as to whether there is a mobility as far as poverty is concerned. You also asked about the small figures, are they being modified, yes or no? Well, we should stress first that what we've said here relates only to that segment with an income lower than 2,000 shekels. So we will not be able to see the impact of the entire ATAC system or program. So what you've seen here, in fact, relates to a very specific segment of population that our research wished to cover. I'd like to add to this issue that was brought up by Gideon. It's important to understand that the aim of the ATAC is not only entering the labor market, but the aim was perhaps the more significant, or at least no less significant aim, is to add to their income. So even if that hampers or hampers on the labor opportunities, it has been said by all the research groups, bearing in mind that the entry element is not significant. The more significant element is to assist them to get off poverty. So you cannot cancel the 2 billions, because the 2 billions are also aiming at helping them being less poor or coming off poverty and reduce the gap in income. And one more point that I wanted to, there was one more thing that you mentioned when you spoke about perhaps giving to this one and not giving to the other one. I'm sure you understand that is something that you cannot do because you cannot identify the groups. But the analysis does assist us. I'm also answering, by the way, to those who related to the cultural aspect. And the aim of this model is not to say something normative. You should give someone or not give someone. The aim is to show the impact. What should be the impact? Whether it is correct and apt to give or not, that is a debate that took place in the past, and it was decided to assist the poor regardless of whether they are an Arab or an ultra-Orthodox or whatever. So I don't think that deciding to give to this one and not giving to the other one is the right way to go about it. We just try to show the impact. That was the only aim of this model. I'm joining what Michelle and Leah have said, just a couple of additions. We spoke about the children's allowances and their impact on employment. Well, I am not familiar with any research that ties directly these two phenomena. It's likely for us to think that if there was some increase between 2004 and 2014, but we do not know if there was an impact. And the other thing about mobility between 2004 and 2014, this was not checked in this study, but there are other studies. One of them I carried out, and it is published on the website of the National Security Institute. One can deduce from that, when you look at a decade, that most of the workers remain more or less in the same quintile where they were in the beginning of the decade. This applies certainly for the higher deciles, but even in the lower deciles or quintiles, we cannot see dramatic changes, and most of the population remains, yes, they remain. The working population, I'm talking only about the working population, because this model was done on workers and wages, not income from other sources, but only on workers and wages. As for the handicapped people, I'd like to add, perhaps we did not stress that information enough, but at the entry from the first shekels, one of the alternatives we proposed, there is an increase of 56% in the number of handicapped people who will be eligible for this credit, and I believe this to be one of the advantages in this change. Thank you. And we are going now to the second presentation, with the second subject.